In some of our homes, we had black and white photographs, paintings, carvings, and even embroideries of the prophet's log cabin in Kentucky. I often thought how the prophet must have loved growing up in those hills far away from civilization. The houses in Jeffersonville, Indiana would have seemed much different than the humble little shack in Kentucky, as it was called. When we thought about Jeffersonville, we thought about the tabernacle. We never thought about it being the big city of William Branham's childhood. Most of us had never seen the photos of historical Jeffersonville, and those of us who did never pictured William Branham in them. When the prophet spoke of his childhood, the scenes he described painted pictures in our minds much like the photos of the log cabin in Kentucky, clear and free for as far as the eye could see. Looking at the historical photographs, however, I realized that Jeffersonville was not a barren wilderness. It was filled with industry and entertainment. Streets were filled with automobiles, rivers with steamboats. Towering buildings lined the busy streets as people scurried down the sidewalks about their daily lives. Bicycles wove in and out of traffic, careful not to run into the people crossing the streets to the local businesses, bars, and casinos. Familiar as we were with his stories of backwoods life, never for a minute would we have envisioned the young prophet in a bustling casino town. We associated the photos of his cabin that the prophet gave us to his childhood, just as he intended. We made paintings of the cabin, sang songs about it, and listened to stories about it in many, many sermons. Our children made wood crafts of the cabin. Some of us took trips to its location in Burkesville, Kentucky, near the Cumberland River. We never knew that the prophet's cabin was used as a prop, or that in 1948 the prophet said that his cabin sat beneath a housing project. We were never aware that the Branham family moved to Indiana before his 3rd birthday. The images of the growing metropolis on Spring Street in Jeffersonville are not what we associated with William Branham's childhood. We gave our children coloring books, told them stories, and even acted out plays describing the prophet's adolescent and teenage years in the wilderness, far away from civilization. As important as the city of Jeffersonville was to the message, it's hard to believe that most of us never studied its history. For many who lived outside of the state of Indiana and abroad, it would have been difficult to study, especially before the internet. Those who lived in Jeffersonville and in the surrounding area, however, have for years had access to a wealth of historical knowledge through the local libraries and the government facilities. If this place were chosen by God, why did He choose it? Looking back, I'm surprised that more people were not curious. Jeffersonville, Indiana has a fascinating history. Jeffersonville was the first underground railroad route crossing the Ohio River. It was a strategic hub for the Union Army during the Civil War. The railroad bridge enabled the Union Army to send supplies to troops in the South. Jeffersonville was the home to Port Fulton and the Howard shipyards, which employed thousands of people in Jeffersonville and in the surrounding area. It was the largest inland shipbuilding site in America from the years 1934 to 1942. Ed Howard, son of Howard Shipyard's owner, James Howard, owned the oldest Haynes automobile in the United States. The Quartermaster Depot served as a storage facility for Union supplies. During World War II, it was used to house German prisoners of war. So many were held there, in fact, that they were given jobs that Jeffersonvillians wanted. It was later occupied by the prophet's sons for distributing the message, and used to grow a multi-million-dollar publishing company called Voice of God Recordings. Named for a quote by William Branham, "I am God's voice to you." Jeffersonville was home to the Indiana State Prison. It was also home to illicit gambling casinos. Though it seems like such a quiet town today, this was not always the case. At one time, the city was booming with activity. The monkeys were a big attraction at the greyhound races, bringing crowds of people from multiple states to watch the monkeys riding on the backs of the dogs as miniature jockeys. The city's liquor and gambling attracted famous mob bosses. The criminal activity in the city was such a problem that it was frequently discussed in city council meetings. City officials feared that Jeffersonville streets would become just as dangerous as Chicago, and Jeffersonville became nicknamed Little Las Vegas.